This week on the Taking 20 podcast.
But an NPC with an affection for a party, or at least certain members of it, an NPC who's actively rooting for and supporting the characters long-term through their adventure, there are layers to that onion that should be handled very carefully, and that onion can really stink if you use it wrong. Thank you for listening to the Taking 20 podcast, episode 243, a back-to-basics episode for DMs about running friendly NPCs in your game. I want to thank this week's sponsor, Oil. You know, black gold, Texas tea. I knew someone who would bathe in oil once a week. He was really slick. Hey, we have a website, www.taking20podcast.com. Come on by, check out some old episodes, make some comments, etc., etc. I want to apologize for having to miss a normal release date. I came down and actually still have a bad case of bronchitis and sinus infection, and at that time I had very little voice for about 2 weeks. I was coughing and wheezing and frankly sounded like crap, even worse than I sound right now. I tried to record the first part of this episode then, and all of the audio processing in the world wouldn't have made it sound even remotely good. I tried all the way up to the Friday before, and I'm sorry, it just wasn't happening. I'm still coughing, by the way, weeks later, and I've been negative for COVID and flu, so yay, but I'm just going to have to push through as best I can, and you're going to have to listen to a fairly rough voice. So I apologize for that. I apologize for the ramble to begin the episode, and sorry again for missing that episode a few weeks ago. The last episode of the year will be published on December 29th. That episode will be about an important concept for DMs and players about fun versus realism, so be ready for that. Anyway, thank you for listening. On to the episode. Most of the people and things that we meet in RPGs are not what I would call friendly, amiable, convivial, whatever word you want to use. Many NPCs are trying very, very hard to kill our characters. Most monsters we meet in dungeons or in the wilderness aren't really interested in having a discussion about the weather and the fall harvest. They don't really care how our characters' families are doing unless they want to find them and eat them too. Even those that aren't openly hostile are usually just there and just want to go about their lives and don't really give two craps about this group of murder hobos who just arrived. Shopkeepers, merchants, travelers, or random people in town who have their own concerns, or just usually two-dimensional, non-motivated beings that exist for a particular interaction and then gone from the world. Now, can you have a game that way? Shit, yeah. You can have a tremendously fun game that way. It's the characters against the world because most of the world ignores them, and those that don't want to profit off them, kill them, take their stuff, or use them to benefit the NPC's own agenda. However, what about the NPCs that don't meet those criteria? The friendly NPCs, or dare I even say it, helpful ones, who root for the PCs, like them, and maybe even support them on their missions. These, for lack of a better term, I'll call friendly NPCs, and they can be a real challenge for DMs. The DMs, handling a hostile raider encounter where they're trying to rob the PCs, sure. Raiders have swords, they threaten to put the pointy ends into the PCs, not a lot of nuance or conversation there. But an NPC with an affection for a party, or at least certain members of it, an NPC who's actively rooting for and supporting the characters long-term through their adventure, there are layers to that onion that should be handled very carefully, and that onion can really stink if you use it wrong. Let's start with the obvious. Advice about handling friendly NPCs will be more relevant in games with heavier roleplay elements. If there's no roleplay in your game and your game is just primarily tactical combat with non-combat NPCs just being there to be shopkeepers and quest givers, then who gives a crap if the local merchant takes a shine to the party cleric? You're not going to roleplay that interaction, so it really doesn't matter. GMs, as we prep for the next session, friendly NPCs are so easy to overlook or at least gloss over. A lot of the games are combat focused, and because of this, the antagonists get more attention than friendly NPCs would. And as a GM, if PCs pay more attention to it, we tend to work more on prepping it. That's just good common sense. We maximize the effectiveness of our prep time by focusing on what the players think is important. As an aside, though, if you're in a game where NPCs are largely ignored, why use friendly NPCs at all? Why should GMs waste their precious time designing conversation topics for Gloria the Armorsmith to have with the PCs just in case they decide to engage in conversation for this 1 in 100 NPC? Well, okay, first of all, having a few conversation topics ready makes your game more realistic, or at least aligned with the vast majority of modern societies. Most interactions with people are at least a neutral interaction. Mostly people ignore everybody else, but sometimes someone strikes up a conversation while you're waiting for the bus, or you're on the train, or while you're waiting for coffee, picking up lunch, or you're at work or school or wherever. Some people are more extroverted than others, and it's easier for them to strike up these conversations, but generally people tend to be fairly neutral towards each other. So GMs, while world building, make the amount of interaction the PCs get with NPCs vary by area of the world. In other words, there's friendly and there's friendly. I happen to live in the southern United States where strangers can be downright chatty with one another. I was waiting for a prescription the other day and had a 15-minute conversation with a very nice guy whom I had never seen before in my life. Sure, it was superficial. We talked about the weather, our kids, who's sick, and well wishes that they get better, but it was not a conversation I would have had in other places where I've lived. Other places, that gentleman and I could have sat there for 2 hours, never even acknowledging the other person's existence. So DMs, are there areas of the world where people are friendlier, more outgoing, more accepting of others? Consider adding some areas like that. Conversely, start adding places where people are annoyed by strangers, especially out-of-towners. Think, and I'm sorry for my listeners who happen to live here, New York City. They do not suffer fools gladly. And the times I've been there, they generally aren't open to having a conversation unless they know you or they have to. Then, of course, there will be areas of the world that are in the middle, where you're generally tolerated but don't piss them off. Maybe that's most of your world, by the way, or maybe it's just the really complex areas like Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. One of my favorite stories about Philly was by a friend of mine whose rental car broke down because a battery died. A couple of people stopped, called him a dumbass, and then helped jumpstart his car. So I'd recommend having areas of your world that are tolerant of outsiders. For example, I'm running Abomination Vaults at the moment, and people in the nearby little town of Otari are generally friendly to outsiders because they have a good trade for adventurers and sailors, and they bring in good money to the town. Some of the local people even run services that cater to outsiders, inns and taverns and gaming halls, etc., but also adventuring equipment. There are places to buy and sell stuff, and even places where outsiders can make a bit of coin during downtime. There are built-in conversations in the adventure that can be had with outsiders that gain the trust of the people of the town, and entire adventures can follow on from there. The group I'm running through has been downright helpful to some of the townsfolk, and word has gotten around. They are generally good eggs. Some people want to meet them, some want their help, and some want to take advantage of them. All of this by starting a couple of friendly NPCs, Ren Savinxi and Tamily Tandervale, to name them. The more the PCs have interacted with friendly NPCs, the more they've grown fond of those NPCs in town, or at least they appear to. So another reason why I put friendly NPCs in my game is that they allow an opportunity to inject relationships into the game. Now, hold on. I don't mean romantic, although there is always that chance. I'm talking about friendly relationships that can come in all kinds of forms. Sure, love interests, absolutely. But honestly, I tend to keep most of the love interest stuff off camera if it's going to happen at all. Okay, yeah, you spend an evening with Tamily discussing her love of the sea and the difficult decision she made to settle down on the mainland. We're not role-playing that out. I love my players, but that's not an aspect of the game that I would enjoy running for them. Friendly NPCs, though, could just become friends and confidants of the party. This, I do roleplay. I love it when that friendly banter starts between a character and one of the NPCs I'm voicing. They grow closer, start to trust each other, and next thing you know, maybe one asks the other for advice, and they root for each other to succeed in whatever is important to them. Another type of friendly NPC that you could have in your game is a mentor or a teacher. Having that wise NPC who can give the player characters a nudge when they're stuck, someone that the PCs trust and that their advice can go a long way. Having that mentor or teacher is a great tool for a DM that can bump the party towards the right direction to keep the adventure going, because if your party's like mine, sometimes they get stuck and start going the wrong direction for a particular adventure, for example. Down a dead-end path, so to speak. Sometimes friendly NPCs could be experts in a field or service providers, the town healer, a guide for the area the PCs haven't been, NPCs that are retainers that work at the party's home or castle. Sometimes the PCs are just consulting with an expert on the occult or tinkering with gadgets or to learn a new skill as they level up. And of course, friendly NPCs could be shopkeepers or merchants. Generally, they'll be friendly to customers who respect the rules and aren't too annoying. That being said, DMs should treat friendly NPCs that are short-term members of the campaign differently than those who will be in the campaign long-term. Short-term NPCs, they can be less developed. Maybe give them a name, a personality, and a motivation, voila, you're done, move on. The PCs are talking with Morgan Gaspacho, the traveling soup maker, who happens to be going the same direction as the party for a time. Brief conversation, likely about ingredients, the weather, their pet donkey named Hominy, who's pulling the ingredient wagon/stove, and voila, you're done. However, if Viscount Delia will be a long-term quest giver, then you're better off fleshing out that NPC to prepare for multiple interactions. Now, as a reminder from a previous episode, what do I mean by fleshing out NPCs? Way back in episode 9. Man, I feel old all of a sudden. I talked about realistic NPCs and making them three-dimensional. Give them a description, something unique about them like their appearance or an accent. Give them goals and dreams and motivations, and voila, fleshed out NPC. Maybe Delia is tall and thin, which is an indication of her half-elf heritage. Maybe they have a small scar on their neck from their time as a fencer. Now, okay, you may be asking, do I mean fencer as in someone who engaged in swordplay? Or do I mean someone who built fences? Either would be an interesting backstory for someone who is now as highly ranked as a Viscount. They're motivated to display their fierce loyalty to their local ruler because of a shared secret from about 10 years ago. What's that secret? I don't know, I'm making it up as I go, but that's for you to determine. That is, if you want to make it part of the campaign. If not, then it's just there for their motivation and done. Guy Flanders from How to Be a Great GM, which is a fantastic YouTube channel, by the way, had a great short video about short-term NPCs that I'll link to in the resources, and if you're watching on YouTube, there'll be a little blip in the corner. You can click that link. He has a great method for generating NPCs called OGAS, Occupation, Goal, Attitude, and State. I'll have a link to this OGAS method video in the resources and in the description of the episode. Go check that out. So short-term NPCs can be simple and quick to design, but I'd recommend that you give long-term NPCs more depth. The last type of differentiation I want to give you regarding friendly NPCs are those NPCs that are external to the party versus those that will travel with or even become members of the party. Up until now, I've been discussing friendly NPCs who will exist away from the party, the general goods merchant, the ship's captain, the party's home butler. But what about NPCs who will be traveling with the party and sticking with them? With external NPCs, you know the PCs will interact with them, and most interactions will be quick and maybe even transactional. Party needs to sell 35 various melee weapons and 16 short bows they claimed from that kobold outpost they raided and broke up. Sure, here's 40 gold pieces for the lot. All right, see you next time. Thanks for coming to Sunny Sundries. Maybe they'll ask Sunny about some goings-on about town, the quest that they're on to figure out what that night howling is and where it's coming from, but mostly the interaction's quick-hitting. But NPCs that stick with the party can be part of a discussion anytime about potentially any and every topic, and you need to be prepared. These NPCs can show more personality and depth. Remember why they're traveling with the PCs. Are they experts in a field, taking care of weapons and animals? Are they combatants that fill a certain role that was missing from the party, like a trap-finding rogue or a healer? If so, they will generally do their job to the best of their ability and do what they're hired to do. For example, let's say the PCs hire an animal expert to help keep the mounts in good condition. This could especially be needed if the mounts are unusual. In most of my games in any fantasy world, absent an ancestral or backstory reason to the contrary, everybody knows how to ride a horse or horse-like animal. Maybe it's riding dogs for halflings, or whatever, but everyone has a standard animal they know how to ride and generally care for. However, what if the party has been given griffins to ride? They will probably need to hire an expert to help take care of these griffins. They may know how to feed and take care of a horse, but a flying apex predator? That's a horse of a different color. Hey! Oh, yeah, I may be sick, but I still got it, baby. The point being that the Griffin caretaker will likely be with the PCs for days, weeks, or maybe even longer. Those are the PCs I take the time to give a backstory and motivation and maybe even interests and hobbies. They will, or at least may, have more interaction with the PCs than the local armorer, so spend more time developing them. I've already said you can include friendly NPCs or not in your campaign, maybe vary their level of interaction depending on where in the world the PCs are, and including them is an opportunity to develop relationships between the PCs and the rest of the world. Obviously, long-term NPCs should be more fleshed out than the one-and-done interactions. So here are some tips for handling friendly NPCs. 1. You don't need a 3-page backstory on every NPC, but they all come from somewhere and want something. Name, description, something unique, maybe a personality if you want to, and a motivation. These 5 things make any fictional character feel more real. 2. All NPCs, especially ones friendly to the party, should react naturally to what's going on around them and what the PCs do. Most of them won't say, "Oh, these gold fillings came from the orphanage that's in flames? Cool. I'll stuff them in the saddlebag and they'll be ready to sell when you're ready to go to the next town." No. Unless they're a complete psychopath, then maybe. They should have believable motivations and reactions to what the PCs do. They should be ready to agree or disagree with party actions, and if they dramatically disagree with the party, maybe they threaten to leave and then do it if the party keeps doing things they disagree with. Have them communicate their feelings with both speech, body language, and tone of voice. 3. Don't make the friendly NPCs a Mary Sue type character, perfect in every way, competent in everything, flawless, etc. It's just not believable. People have flaws and drawbacks, and your NPCs should as well. And then 4. Don't make long-term NPCs the deus ex machina that solves all the PC's problems. "Well, I may be a simple day laborer hired to carry these parts for you, but I also happen to be a level 20 rogue. I can pick that lock for you." What the hell is that? Don't turn long-term NPCs into the magical cure-all, solve-all, do-all for the party, thereby rendering the party unnecessary. Have them stick to what they're good at and be good at that. Friendly NPCs add depth and realism to your game. If you have any roleplay whatsoever, I would suggest that you not just focus on hostile encounters, but also have some friendly NPCs, whether they only appear once or recurring NPCs throughout your campaign. Make them unique in some way, give recurring NPCs some depth, have them react naturally to the PC's actions and choices, and I'd be willing to bet that you and your friends would have fun doing it. Hey, if you like this podcast, please consider sharing an episode from whatever your podcast listening site of choice is or the corresponding YouTube video. It could help grow the podcast, and I would be very, very grateful if you did. In 2 weeks, I'm going to highlight an important DM tip that's in the 2024 DM guide about fun versus realism. But before I go, I want to thank this week's sponsor, Oil. I am so sorry about the bad oil joke at the beginning of the episode. I promise, future oil jokes will be more refined. This has been episode 243, giving you some reasons for and tips to run friendly NPCs. My name is Jeremy Shelley, and I hope that your next game is your best game.
The Taking 20 podcast is a Publishing Cube media production. Copyright 2024. References to game system content are copyright their respective publishers.